Robert Arthur?
Yeah, or just Rob.
Just Rob, okay. So Rob, good morning to you.
Good morning, Khalil. Thanks for having me.
Well, thanks for being here. So what is a freeman on the land, first off?
Well, it depends a lot on who you ask. From our perspective, a freeman on the land is someone who, having studied the law, realizes that there's a whole lot of deception which is used by the government, which essentially gets us to abandon our natural authority over our public servants, and by way of submitting applications, they get us to be in a position of essentially a ward of the state under our servants. So a freeman on the land is someone who has rejected those so-called social benefits that come with such a high price in exchange for a higher duty of action. Essentially, I think all of our grandparents were freemen on the land, and then along the way we've been tricked into becoming wards of the state. So a freeman on the land, we've been told that a lot of people will say that we're anti-government. We're not anti-government. We're pro-good government. But of course, the government isn't going to present that to the Canadian public because everyone would be, yeah, we're with the freemen on that. It's been said that we claim that we are above the law. We do not believe we are above the law. We refuse to believe that those in positions of authority themselves are above the law. So they present that, they twist that, and present that to the public as us believing we are above the law. What we've come to conclude, however, is that like things like the Motor Vehicle Act, so many people have driver's license, operate upon the presumptions that they have an obligation to have one, never even read the Motor Vehicle Act, but when you do, you start to see certain questions.
Like what?
Like whether or not you're actually obliged to have such a thing in order to exercise your common law right to travel, to get on the highway and access the highways. If you look under the Criminal Code of Canada, highway is defined as roadways to which we have a right of access. A right doesn't require permission.
But driving the car itself does.
Well, the trickery that they use, and bear in mind, I believe that if you're going to get out there and use the public roads, you should demonstrate competency and courtesy, and you're going to have to follow the rules of the road. But what they've done is that if you want to use those roads for commercial activities, for being a delivery driver, a taxi service, a bus, then you do need a license. So they get you to get a license, and now you're in a position where you could very easily go out and deliver pizzas or deliver anything, just throw a metal sticker on your side. But they haven't ever removed the right specifically to get out on the road and go from point A to point B. It's a fundamental human right.
But that could be bicycling or walking or
Well, there's
whatever.
actually highways out there where they have signs saying no bicycles, no walking. And what about those roads? So we do have the right of access, and I'm not, I don't know that that's the biggest argument that I would bring, because I mean it's one of the rights that we have been slowly eroded through conditioning and the use of the language and whatnot. But I think there's far greater issues out there. I mean there's homelessness out there while banks are making billions. There's got to be something that's wrong there.
How many members are there in Canada? How many freemen are there?
I believe that the government has put estimates at about 30,000. I believe it's probably closer to 100 or so. I know that there's a whole lot of people who are aware of it on the peripherals of it, but who want to see, I don't know, more success. People aren't jumping aboard unless they are suffering at some point. I mean, generally there is some impetus that gets them to join. And the Freeman movement is, in fact, it's not the cause, it's the effect. It's because people are getting so unhappy with what appears to be a Nazi nation, a corporate government. Our form of government is archaic. We're expected to argue in court, against corporations that have no souls and unlimited resources, and we're denied access to the courts because we're not even a member of the Law Society. So a lot of people are starting to look at what's going on and saying, listen, this isn't the Canada we want. This isn't the Canada where corporations have all the powers. Our rights and resources are stripped bare and sold abroad. We get nothing out of it. Something is off, and a lot of people are starting to realize that. And when you start looking into the books, you start looking at the law, you start seeing the deception.
Is there then a unifying ideology? I mean, is there an ideal government that all freemen
I think
might
if
want
you
to see?
had to describe the ideology, it would be a spiritual libertarianism. What we would like to see, and bear in mind I speak just for myself and some other people that I've spoken with, I'm not the head of the movement or anything like that, But I think where we're going is a form of democracy which is far more direct, a direct democracy where we don't have to elect people every 4 years to represent us. We can deliberate, discuss, and determine the issues directly, whether it's pipelines, fracking, or anything along those lines. I see a need for new courts, people's courts, where only people outstanding corporations and fictions would have no voice. And a group, personally, I think everyone in Canada who is sane and an adult should swear to be a peace officer to preserve and maintain the public peace and to operate within certain civilized standards where you swear you will respect privacy and property and treat people with courtesy and dignity. I think that would go a long way to making a better country. But in the end, that doesn't address the real issue, which is, of course, the money and how the money is put into circulation, all of it with interest attached. If that's the only place that money is created and put into circulation, then your demand for repayment is greater than the supply available, and the people providing the money end up owning everything. Mathematically, the system can't fly.
I want to go back to your point about peace officers and that sort of thing, because part of the reason that we've got you in studio today is to talk a bit about this incident in Nanaimo. Now, police in Nanaimo say 3 men in question refused to communicate with them. They were wanted for impersonating police officers, and they've linked those people to the Freeman movement. Are any of those actions consistent with the Freeman philosophy?
Ignoring other peace officers when they come to the door is not consistent with a peace officer's actions in my book. I read the recommended, or the RCMP's recommendations for charges, and what it seemed to hedge around was that they used the British Columbia Coat of Arms. And as such, they were apparently trying to pass themselves off as government sworn peace officers. Now, myself, I am a peace officer. I'll publicly say that on the air. I've presented myself as such through my affidavits in court, and, but I do not try to claim that I was hired by the government. I do not try to claim that I am a police officer. I'm not armed or anything like that, and I wouldn't try to go out and arrest someone, especially a police officer or something like that, without going through the proper process of going before a judge swearing out an information. Those 3 guys, 2 of them specifically, Jody Lang and Alexander Ream, I know them quite well. These guys are very good human beings in my book. They're very caring, they have a good heart, and certainly they weren't trying to go out and gain any sort of advantage from this. Being a peace officer is far more of a duty than any of the advantages that come with it. You have a duty to treat people with a certain amount of dignity and respect, and to interact with the police officers from that perspective of pure peace. And it doesn't seem to me like those 3 in that case. I don't know who decided just to ignore the cops, but that was the wrong play for sure.
Where did this philosophy, in a bigger picture now, where did this philosophy come from originally?
Well, it depends. I mean, it depends how far back you want to look at it. If you look at the story of Jesus Christ, some argue that he was a freeman, arguing with the lawmakers of his day, and all of their control mechanisms were all about dietary restrictions, and he was coming by telling people, yeah, don't worry about that. And those priests and Sadducees and Pharisees were losing out big time, and that's why they ended up, coming down on him. I believe it's been a constant struggle throughout history between the protectors and the critics. And for any good society to exist, you need both of those, and you need a method by which they can interact. If your critics have too much power and authority, you end up with stagnation and a slow death of your society. It turns into a Nazi nation where authority is first. If your critics have too much authority and power, then you lack the stability necessary, and you end up with a collapse and a violent revolution. I think Canada is unique in the fact that I'm very happy that I live in a country where I can bring such critical action to bear against the government without any fear whatsoever of reprisals or retribution. But that doesn't mean that our country is perfect and I shouldn't say anything. I've had people tell me, don't you like the fact that you can speak up about the government in Canada? And I'm like, yeah, and that's what I'm doing. Well, if you don't like it, move to North Korea. To me, that makes no sense. I mean, our rights and our freedoms, they exist because of the sacrifices of previous generations, and they are lost when these generations become lazy.
Meanwhile, the Freemen have not gained a lot of fans in the legal establishment. I think the Canadian Security Intelligence Service says Freemen are a major policing issue. There have been a lot of the legal establishment in both Canada and the U.S., as you know, who have suggested that there's potential for violence for Freemen.
I don't know about the potential for violence, and I think we should ask the Canadian people. I mean, all you're saying is the lawyers don't like us. Well,
essentially, but my ultimate question is why do you think that is? What's
because
happened?
we question their authority, and they're like word magicians, and we're the ones there heckling the magician, pointing out their little trickery that they use, the word tricks that they use and that they employ, and we're not following for them anymore. You know what they're really scared of is we are no longer giving them our signatures on documents with the word application and submission on it, and that is how they gain their authority. And without that, they have no evidence that we have consented, and we hold them to the law. And they don't like that. They have used their knowledge of the law and their tricky, deceptive wording to get us to believe that we have an obligation to engage in an action, when actually we have no obligation, but if we do engage in that action, that transfers the authority. So once you start seeing how they go about it, it starts becoming quite plain that what they're doing is just inviting us to act like kids so that they can nanny us and take care of us. And the Freemen are saying, no, we're not acting like kids anymore. Now, unfortunately, a lot of people who come to this information, there seems to be 5 stages. The first one is incredulousness, and people reject it. The government would never lie to you. You can't do that. Then once people start actually reading the law, using the law dictionary, forming their own opinion, they do see the deception and they get angry. And a lot of people might show that the Freemen are angry only because they're looking at people in this stage of their growth. The next stage, and it's the more difficult step, is the one where you abandon your anger and you accept responsibility for what is and what's happening. And if you can't accept that responsibility, then you're going to be stuck in the angry phase. But most of the Freemen I know, they're well past the acceptance of responsibility phase.
Is there a bigger goal to the social movement? I mean, is there a goal to sort of
Peace and abundance, a better country. You know, peace and abundance where we all share in the wealth equally, or at least we have a more equal access to it, without the bankers making billions and billions every quarter. Well, they're doing that on the backs of hardworking Canadians at their expense, and making people homeless while they're doing it. Something is seriously screwed up when you look at the system and you see hungry people going by restaurants closing, going out of business, because there's simply not enough of these little pieces of paper in existence for this trade and exchange, whereas the bankers are hoarding it and people are going hungry.
Well, Rob, it's good to have you in studio this morning. Thanks very much for taking the time.
Thank you very much for having me.
That's great. Hope that was okay.
Yeah.